Okay, so I want to share how I got here. I want to share how I figured out I was trans and how I moved all the way across the country and pursued art. So it started, I grew up in a kind of smaller conservative town in Michigan. And my parents raised me, they're both engineers, and they raised me to be an engineer. And they got me involved in STEM and robotics, and it just kind of became my identity. I was always kind of like, you're going to be an engineer. And yeah, I thought that was super cool. There was so much that I loved about engineering. I loved that you could be creative. And I loved just like how it was just like an art to make machines and robots and whatnot. And I was like, so, like, this is so great. I can be an artist and I can put my ideas together, and I don't know, it was so exciting. And they sent me to engineering school, and then I realized that's not what engineering is. My whole life just led up to engineering. I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? That's not what this is. I got like an internship, and it's just like, no, it's like you follow procedures and protocols, and it's not really art. It's not self-expression. It's like, it's so analytical and it's so procedural, and I really lost interest. And I guess at the same time, yeah, I started dating this girl in college who, I always thought since I was like a kid, like, okay, I'm very kinky. I love exploring weird kinks, and I had this one that I shared with her. This is starting in a weird kind of way, but I think it'll all come together. But yeah, I had this kink that I was like, this is so important that I need to communicate this to you. That when I have sex, I'm a woman. And it felt like really natural to me, and it felt like, this is just like okay because it's within my sexuality. And I was a Christian, I was raised to be a Christian, but there was something about like, as long as nobody knows, like, it's okay with you and God, because it feels like right. There's something in there that's like okay, and I shared that with her. That's my kink. And during sex, I'm a woman, and she got really freaked out, and I was so confused as to why. I didn't understand it. Yeah, it was kind of traumatizing actually. Her reaction, it was like, no, this is like real to me. Like, why? Something I must have miscommunicated. I must have said something slightly off or something. I don't know. I couldn't figure out what I had done, and yeah, and it was like I'd never grown up around gay people. Like, gay people were always like, that's wrong, or like trans people, that's a sin, and that's not um, something about that. Like, it was like, oh well, because I always thought trans people are pedophiles, and I was always told like, oh, did you hear about that trans person that raped a kid? So I was getting really close to my best friend from high school, and I realized that I was in love with her, and I got out of this relationship with this girl from college, and um, I I there was a night when we were driving around town, and we stopped at this beach, on the Great Lake, and I just told her, I was like, hey, it seems like we're really getting close, and if we get like we might have a relationship, and if that happens, then um, and we might have a sexual relationship, and this is something that I need to communicate. And I did a lot of research, because last time I expressed this to somebody, it didn't go well at all. But yeah, I thought it was just a kink, and I looked online, and it really, because I was trying to figure out where the error in communication was, and I actually learned, like, this might not be a kink, this might mean something. And what I found online, it's like one of two things. And she was really receptive as I was telling her all this, and I was like, yeah, this either means that I am I have this thing called autogynephilia, which means that I'm sexually attracted to myself, but because only straight people exist, I get turned on at the idea of myself as a woman, and it is a kink, and this is kind of how it works. And it was like, or there's this idea that like I can just be a woman, and the reason that it's a kink for me is because it just feels so good to be that connected to myself that it's erotic. Like, it feels so right and correct, and I only experience it sometimes, and I'm transgender, and that was like a really big thing for me to like accept. I was like, oh my god, that changes my whole perspective on everything if that's the case. My whole like worldview. And I was like, I think that feels more right. And there were still some things in me. I was like, I was at first I was really nervous about that because I'd only imagined myself being turned on at the thought of myself being a woman, and I was like, man, are people who transition, are they just turned on all the time? Well, no, you get used to it, but it feels a lot more natural. It feels a lot more connective, and like you're being yourself, and people are seeing you like as the correct. Like it's just. Yeah, and I told her, and she was like, yeah, well, I'm bisexual, so it works out. Like, I'm still attracted to you. And that was so wonderful, and we had this beautiful relationship after that, and I shared some love songs that I wrote for her, and we, so at the same time I was dropping out of college, so it all ties in. But my parents, I guess I should say my mom is very domineering, and she's very, like, if she gets control, no, she has control over her children, and it's like she'll pay for our college, and she'll pay for our car, and she has like a really big fancy house, and everything looks beautiful, and and just as long as she gets to lord it over your head. And she's very domineering, and just is always making us feel guilty, and like we have to do whatever she wants, and she's kind of very sadistic, and I do have a song about that I am releasing soon. But yeah, so I was like, man, if I drop out of college, and also if I'm transgender, I there's no safe way to do this other than having just overnight having full financial independence from her and from my family. And so I was with my partner, and she was like, and I'm not gonna say names in this video, but she had this like abandoned house in her family. This house is like over 200 years old. It's like a historical landmark right downtown that somehow is not commercial district or whatever, in this really like small conservative town in Michigan, like on the water. And she's like, she had inherited this house, or at least she thought at the time. It's kind of a long, complicated story. I won't get into the specifics, but she was like, well, Cassie, you can move into this house, and we'll just move all your stuff overnight without your parents knowing, and in the morning you'll break the news and you'll be safe in this abandoned house that doesn't have running water or heat. But it was like a start, and I did that, and they were pissed. It did not go well. but I was safe, and then I was really like, my whole world had space to open up, and for me to just like really figure out who I was. And I lived there for a while, and I got a job at Goodwill, and so I lived in this house for a while, and I transitioned, and I kind of blocked my parents for a while, like just their phone number and from social media, and I just was like, I just need to just totally stop contact with them and really like allow myself space to explore, because when I would be in contact, it was just constant berating me and like yelling at me and just all this like guilt tripping. I'm gonna call the cops on you. You're not. It's illegal to live in a house without running water, and they didn't know where I was, but I had told them about this house like once or twice, and so they kind of guessed. And so yeah, I blocked them, and I was just like, okay, now I'm gonna figure out who I am, and I'm going to really just give myself space to exist and be with my partner. And we had this beautiful relationship, and it was so lovely living in that house. At the same time, I dropped out of college, and I got a job at Goodwill, and I got this really cheap car that barely held itself together the whole time I lived in that house. And well, there became a time when I couldn't afford to sustain myself. I don't know, I think I quit my job and I was trying to do DoorDash or something. I was really struggling to figure it out, and so I called my aunt who lived an hour away, and I was like, hey, I can't support myself anymore and I'm wondering if I can live with you. And she accepted me with open arms and was just like, yeah, of course. And like, it's just good to hear that you're alive and doing okay. Like, your parents are worried about you and whatnot. And I was like, well, that's a whole can of worms. But yeah, I lived with her for a while, and it was nice, and I saved up money, and I started to really miss being somewhere where I knew people, and I had a hard time making connections in Flint, where she lived, and Flint, Michigan, and I just really missed it back home. And so I decided, okay, I'm gonna just quit my job and move back, and I don't know, I didn't have like a living. My friend was like, maybe you can stay on our couch. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll come back. I'll stay on their couch until I figure out a place. And I stayed on the couch one night, and then they were like, oh, no, you can't stay on our couch. And I was confused. I was like, why? What the fuck do I do now? And so I got like a hotel room, and then like I tried to stay on my other friend's couch, and it was like a whole thing. And she was like really trying to help me figure out what to do. And she was like, well, one thing you can do is you can buy a van and live in the van. And I had never heard of anybody doing that besides like, oh, like the Van Down by a River sketch on SNL. And it was just like, no, like homeless people who don't got their shit together, like people who are like meth addicts live in vans. Like, that's crazy. Why would I do that? And she was like, no, this is like a thing. Like people buy solar panels for their vans, and they insulate the van, and they build furniture, and they make it really nice, and you can actually like live really well in a van, and you don't pay rent. And I like looked into it, and I was like amazed, and I was like, holy shit, that's a thing people do. People actually live in their vans. Yeah, and I decided that I was gonna buy a van, and I went on Facebook Marketplace, and it was like, oh, van listing $2,000 posted 20 minutes ago. I was like, holy shit. And it was like a bunch of other ones that like were broken and more expensive than I could afford, and this one was like I called them, and I showed up like immediately with the cash in hand, and it ran perfectly, and I was like, what the fuck? And I bought the van, and it was like so amazing. I just built furniture in the van, and I just lived in it, and I was able to be back in my hometown and with my partner, and it was amazing. And I transitioned, and I made music, and yeah, I have another video about my second day in the van. The van got some upgrades that aren't really recorded, but yeah, I lived in the van for a while. And there was a time when my partner broke up with me, and at that point I realized I don't have really family or community that like really embraces me, and I don't have anything that I'm really tied to besides my partner. I was like so depressed, and I had like a job that felt meaningless to me, and I was like, I'm just living in a van illegally, and scraping by, and I was so depressed, and I was like, man, I could kill myself right now, or I could just throw everything away, like just totally, and just drive to the West Coast and start over and see what happens. And I decided that's what I was gonna do. There was this like romantic fantasy, like, you know, all the hippies in the 80s would get in their car and drive to California and just live happily there and smoke weed and do whatever. And I was like, I want to see what that's about. But something about California just wasn't. I was like, man, California's overrated and it's so expensive, and so I was like, Oregon. Oregon. And so I looked at a map, and I decided I wanted to come to Eugene, Oregon, and it's not too big, it's not too small of a city, and it's not too far north, and the weather seems lovely. And so I got in my van, I drove to Eugene, Oregon, straight across the map, and it was really good and it was really bad, because people treated me like a human here. Like back at home, I was less than human. I was like I won't say what I was called, because I don't know if it's like I can say slurs on YouTube. But yeah, nobody harassed me. People respected me, and it was like really beautiful. But I had no idea what community was, and I was isolating myself in this van, and it was interesting. It was like beautiful here. There's mountains and everything. I don't know. I lived in the van for a few months, and then I met this girl in this other van. I saw this van, and I was like, it was Valentine's Day, believe it or not. I like get in my front seat, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna find a bathroom somewhere or whatever. I look over, and in this other van, there's like the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. And I was like, holy shit, I need to talk to this person. And so I like went to the bathroom, came back, and the van was still there, and I was just sitting in my van like, how do I approach this random stranger in a van that I think is really attractive and really magnetic? And I couldn't figure out what to do, and it was just in this parking lot that I had to leave at the end of the day, so I left without saying anything. But that night I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna write a note, and next time I see this van, because I had seen this van here and there, next time I see this van, I'm gonna leave this note on their windshield and say, hey, my name's Cassie, and I've seen your van around, and I would really love to, like, I don't know if you ever want a van friend, let me know, here's my number. And I did that. Next time I saw the van, it was a week later, and I thought about it every day. And then I saw the van, I left the note in the windshield, and I went to start my job at like Walmart, and I got this text from them. They're non-binary, they use they them, but they were like, hi, yeah, I got your note, that's so sweet, we should connect. And we connected, and it was just like the most electric energy that I've ever felt with anybody in my life. And we were just like so attracted to each other. We had such chemistry, and we were just like making jokes, and I don't know, it was just like we listened to the same obscure music, and it was, I don't know, we were both like escaping our like conservative, not supportive kind of backgrounds, and trying to just travel and figure stuff out. And I was so in love. And a couple weeks into like hanging out and whatnot, they ghosted me. And I was heartbroken, and I was like, hey, what happened? And I like tried to call, and I left like a voice text and was like, hey, I really missed hanging out, where'd you go? And they were like, well, I actually have a partner, and they're coming to visit me, and I don't know, I don't think we should be close or whatever. And I was so fucking heartbroken. I was like, no, they love me in their heart. Like they think, they must think about me as much as I think about them. And it was like, I don't know. I had such a, I've reached everywhere I went in town, I would just think about them, and everything would remind me of them. So I was like, fuck, I need to leave. I need to leave town, and I need to explore and get them off my mind. And it's so funny how these things happen. When I decided that, I got this letter in the mail that was like, hey, Cassie, those mutual funds that you invested in high school, you still have them. and I was like, what? I thought I took them out for college, to pay for college. And it was like, nope, you still have them, and we're letting you know because you need to legally change your name on the mutual funds. And I was like, what the fuck? So I had a couple $1,000 just available to me, and I was like, okay, this is money to travel with. And so I took the money out, and I traveled all the West Coast, and I saw like all these national parks, and it was amazing. And the whole time I was thinking about that person I'd fallen in love with, but I was like, well, I need to travel and really see beautiful things and understand that the world is bigger. And yeah, it was amazing. I ran out of money in California, and I was like, okay, well, I'm in San Jose. I don't know anything about San Jose, but I think I'm gonna like just live here for a while, get a job, and make some money. And I did. And I lived there for a couple months, and then after a while, the van, well, I went over a speed bump, and the leaf spring broke. It was all rusted out, and so everywhere I would go, there was this like scraping noise, and it was like the van would violently shake because there's something wrong with the suspension. And I took it to a mechanic, and he was like, yeah, you would need a welder to fix this. And I took it to a welder, and he was like, well, there's rubber components in here, and it's all rusty, and to weld this and fix this, it might not be recoverable. And I was like, fuck. My aunt back in Flint, Michigan, though, she said, hey, Cassie, if anything bad ever happens, like, you can come and stay with me. And so I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sell the van, I'm going to buy a plane ticket, and with the money that I'd sell the van with, because I had spent all my money that I had saved just working and living in the van, I had spent it all on mechanic stuff, trying to fix the van. And but with the money that I sold the van with, I was going to like buy a car at my aunt's house and then go to work in the car. And so I bought this plane ticket. I got rid of almost everything I owned, except for like my laptop and a couple things that like would fit on the plane, and got rid of like my snowboard and that, I don't know. Yeah, a lot of things. I sold the van to some scientist who needed it for work, his job, I don't know, it was a weird thing. And I got on this plane, and I got to Flint, Michigan, and my aunt was like, well, actually, Cassie, you can't live here because I get Social Security, and if somebody in this house has a job, then they could take away my Social Security, and then I would be fucked. And I was like, what? And she's like, you can stay here until you buy a car. And so I looked for a car, and like I stayed about a month, and then I bought this car that it's like a small little Chevy Cobalt, and I was gonna live in the car. I did live in the car in November in Michigan, and it was really cold, but I I bought a really good sleeping bag, and I slept in the car and went to my job at TJ Maxx, and I was like, wow, it's gonna get in the negative temperatures, and I'm going to freeze, and I really need to find a place to stay. So I was searching and searching, and nothing in my hometown was affordable. I don't know why. It's some like really small little town with nothing significant, but nothing was affordable, and I couldn't find roommates. But I eventually found this place in Detroit. There was an ad that was like, "Oh, must be LGBT friendly, $450 a month," and so I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm LGBT friendly," and I reached out, and it was like kind of in like a sketchy neighborhood in Detroit. But like, what neighborhood isn't sketchy in Detroit? I don't know. There's maybe one or two. And it was this like prostitute who did OnlyFans or whatever, and I don't know. It was like a whole thing. Like there were gunshots outside every once in a while, and it was just like casual. And it was like, I lived there because like that was the only place I could afford, and I was just doing my job. And she bought this house for $5,000 in like an even sketchier part of town, and she was like, yeah, so I'm buying this house, and in March I'm gonna move into this house, and I'm so excited, and it's like I'm renovating it, and let's go check on the house and see how it's doing. And I was like, all right, cool, yeah. And we go to this house, and it's in like the ghetto, and there's like a bunch of like hoodlums in this car in the front yard staring us down as we enter the house, and we look like somebody broke in and stole the windows that she installed or whatever, and it's like a whole thing. And we open the garage, and there's a brand new Durango in the garage, half taken apart, and she's like, what the fuck is this doing here? And she was like, I think this is a stolen vehicle, I'm gonna call the cops. And the cops came, and they confirmed it's a stolen vehicle, and she's like, what the fuck is happening? And yeah, it was kind of wild for me to experience that. She was still like really hopeful. She was like, yeah, I'm not gonna pay rent every month, and it'll be awesome, and you can live with me because you're such a great roommate. I would like, love your presence. And I was like, I really liked Eugene, Oregon. I have this car now that I can live in, so I think I might just take my car back to Oregon. And she's like, okay, well, when that doesn't work out, let me know, and you can stay with me. And so I packed up all my things, I got my security deposit back, and I traveled first to the Grand Canyon because I really wanted to see it, and I was like, fuck it, I might as well make this really fun for myself. And I sent her a picture of me at the Grand Canyon, and she was like, oh my god, I didn't think you'd actually do it, but that's so cool. And she said that if I ever needed a place to stay, that I was welcome at her house. And but it was so cool that I was doing that, and it felt really good. And I came to Eugene, and I lived in my car, and I had made one friend the last time I had lived here in my van, and she invited me to yoga, and afterwards everyone went to the bar across the street, and we just hung out. And yeah, I really got to know people, and I started like making friends and forming community. And I've found a place like where I live now, and that's my story. I think I might have left some things out, or there might be some holes, things that I forgot to include, but yeah, I now I live in Eugene, and it's so lovely for me because people are so accepting, and I'm kind of woo-woo, and people like there's hippies here, and we talk about astrology together and make art together. And I don't know if I'll be here forever because my life takes a lot of unexpected twists, and and things might change and shift, but yeah, I definitely I found my home, and I figured out who I am, and so thanks.